She took in a cowboy's son. By sunrise, the man said, "You're the home I've been searching for." Evening crept over Dusty Ridge, turning the prairie gold to copper. The wind moved slowly, carrying the smell of rain and sage. Lydia Graves stood by the barn, her hands raw from mending a broken gate. The sound came first, a soft rustle in the dry grass. She turned. A boy stood near the fence line, barefoot, dirt on his cheeks, clutching something that glinted in the fading light. His hair was the color of dust and hay. He looked too small for the vast stretch of land behind him. Lydia set down her hammer. "You lost, son?" The boy didn't speak. He stared at her boots, then at the barn, as if deciding whether to run or stay. She stepped closer, careful not to spook him. "You got a name?" "Tommy," he whispered. His voice cracked like a dry twig. "Well, Tommy," she said gently, "the night's coming quick. You'll freeze out here." He shook his head hard. "Pa told me to hide, said not to come out till it was quiet again." The last of the sun slid behind the hills. Lydia looked down the dirt road, empty except for a circling buzzard. Somewhere far off, thunder muttered. She felt that old ache in her chest, the one that came every time she saw something helpless and alone. "Come on," she said softly. "You can sit by the stove till he comes back." Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wood smoke and beans. Lydia poured water into a tin cup and set it before him. He didn't drink right away. He pulled a locket from his pocket and set it on the table. Lydia saw it was brass, worn smooth by small fingers. Inside was the picture of a man, strong jaw, eyes shadowed by the brim of his hat. The kind of man who'd seen too much road and not enough rest. "That's your pa?" she asked. Tommy nodded. "He said he'd come back when it's safe." The boy's words made her uneasy. Safe from what? She watched him eat slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to waste a crumb. His clothes were torn, his hands bruised. She didn't ask questions. Not yet. When the lamps burned low, Lydia laid a blanket by the hearth. "You'll sleep there tonight." Tommy looked up, unsure. "Ain't you scared I might be bad?" She smiled faintly. "You're a boy with tired eyes. That's all I see." Outside, the storm broke. Rain hit the roof in hard, steady bursts. Lydia sat by the window, listening to the thunder roll through the valley. Her husband's coat still hung on the peg by the door. 3 winters gone, and she still couldn't bring herself to move it. He'd died chasing fairness, helping a ranch hand who'd been accused of theft. The law hadn't cared for fairness much. Lydia pressed her hand to the cold glass, watching the lightning flash over the ridge. Somewhere out there, a man had told his boy to hide. Maybe he was running from the same kind of justice that took her husband. Maybe not. She looked back at Tommy. He'd fallen asleep by the fire, his face soft in the glow. For the first time in months, the cabin didn't feel so empty. The wind howled once more, rattling the shutters. Lydia rose, crossed the room, and closed the door against the storm. The firelight flickered over her face, lonely, strong and quietly afraid. Outside, the prairie went dark, save for one lantern burning in the window. Tomorrow would bring questions, but for tonight, she chose mercy. The morning broke gray and cold. Mist clung to the grass, and the hills looked like they were holding their breath. Lydia stepped outside, wrapping her shawl tight around her shoulders. The storm had passed, but the ground was soft with mud. From inside the barn came a faint thud, boots against wood. She froze. Tommy was still asleep by the fire, so whoever was in her barn wasn't him. Lydia reached for the pitchfork leaning by the wall and crept forward. The door creaked as she pushed it open. A man stood by the stalls, his shirt torn, one arm pressed tight against his ribs. His horse, a bay coated in dried sweat, stomped and snorted beside him. He turned at the sound. "Don't," Lydia warned, raising the pitchfork. The man didn't move. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but his eyes, gray, cold, and tired, found hers. "I ain't here to steal," he said quietly. "Just looking for my boy." Lydia's heart thudded. "Your boy?" He nodded once. "Name's Tommy." She hesitated, searching his face. "He's inside. Slept by the fire. Said his pa told him to hide." Relief flashed across his expression, followed quickly by pain. He stumbled a little, clutching his side. Blood darkened the fabric beneath his fingers. "You're hurt," she said. "I've been worse." He leaned against a post, trying to steady himself. "Name's Rafe Callahan." The name rang faintly familiar, something she'd heard whispered over town gossip. Lydia narrowed her eyes. "You got lawmen after you?" Rafe's jaw tightened. "Depends which story they're telling." She didn't lower the pitchfork. "What story's yours?" He looked straight at her. "I'm wanted for a robbery I didn't do. Been hunting the man who framed me. Found his trail near here. And your boy? Couldn't leave him alone anymore. But when the shooting started, I told him to run." Lydia's fingers loosened around the handle. "You were at the ridge last night?" He nodded. "Didn't mean for him to get caught in it." "I came back as soon as I could." She studied him. The mud on his boots, the exhaustion in his voice. He didn't look like a killer, but the law didn't care much for looks. She thought of her husband again, of how the sheriff had said evidence is evidence, and that was that. Rafe stepped closer. "Thank you for taking him in. I'll be gone soon as he's safe." "Safe," Lydia repeated, her voice low. "You think you're safe anywhere near Dusty Ridge? The deputy's been riding through looking for someone." "I know." His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "Name's probably mine." "What'd you steal?" she asked softly. "Nothing." He met her eyes. "Except time, maybe." A shout carried faintly over the wind, the sharp bark of a man's voice. Lydia turned toward the sound. Out on the trail, 2 riders appeared, small figures moving fast through the mist. "Lawman?" Rafe asked, already reaching for his gun. She didn't answer right away. The air felt thick, the kind that made choices heavy. "You ride out now," she said. "They'll see you." He looked toward the hills, then back at her. "If I stay? Then you'll keep still till I say otherwise." Their eyes locked, neither trusting, neither fully doubting. Lydia motioned toward the old trapdoor at the back of the barn. "There's a cellar below the feed sacks. You hide there. I'll tell them I ain't seen you." Rafe hesitated, then nodded. "You don't owe me that." "Maybe not," she said. "But your boy deserves a chance to breathe." He held her gaze one moment longer before vanishing down the ladder into the dark. By the time the riders reached her gate, Lydia was alone again, hands trembling just enough to make the latch rattle. The first lawman swung down from his horse, his badge catching the weak morning light. "Mornin', Mrs. Graves," he said, tipping his hat. "You seen a man riding through here?" "Calls himself Rafe Callahan." Lydia swallowed hard and met his eyes. "Can't say that I have, deputy." Her voice was steady. The lie hung in the air like smoke. The deputy's eyes narrowed, studying Lydia like a hawk sizing up a rabbit. He was a tall man with a narrow face and a mustache that looked drawn too straight. Rain dust yet clung to his coat. Behind him, his partner stayed on horseback, scanning the property with restless eyes. "You're sure?" the deputy asked. "He was spotted near Dusty Ridge last night. Armed, wounded, and traveling with a boy about 8. Lydia forced a small frown. "Ain't seen anyone but my chickens. They don't travel much." The deputy gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mind if we take a look around?" Her heart jumped. "For what?" "For peace of mind," he said. "Yours and ours." Lydia stepped aside, her jaw firm. "Don't break nothing." The 2 men spread out, one toward the barn, the other circling behind the cabin. She stood still, arms folded, trying not to look toward the cellar door hidden under the hay. Every footstep sounded too loud, every breath too short. Inside the barn, boots thudded on the boards above Rafe's head. Dust sifted down. He crouched in the dark, gun drawn but held low. Tommy's voice echoed faintly from the cabin, sleepy, confused. "Miss Lydia?" "Go back to bed, Tommy," she called quickly. The deputy poked through the stalls, lifted a tarp, and kicked over a bucket. His eyes flicked toward the trapdoor, then away. He yanked it once, testing the latch. It held. Finally, he stepped outside. "Looks clear," he said to his partner. "Man's probably long gone." He turned to Lydia. "You're a widow, ain't you?" "Yes." "Sorry to hear that." His tone didn't sound sorry. Your husband worked for the McCready Ranch, didn't he? Lydia's stomach tightened. He did. Years back. The deputy studied her face. Funny thing, McCready was the one robbed last month. Said Callahan's the man who done it. She kept her eyes level. And you believe everything McCready says? He smiled again, sharp this time, till I got reason not to. He tipped his hat. If you see Callahan, let us know. There's a reward. Lydia nodded stiffly. I'll remember. The deputies rode off, dust rising behind them. She waited until their shapes disappeared over the ridge before exhaling, long and shaky. Back in the barn, she lifted the trapdoor. They're gone, she whispered. Rafe climbed up slowly, his shirt clinging to him with sweat and dirt. You lie better than most outlaws? I learned from the law, she said. He gave a small laugh, then winced from pain. She gestured toward the cabin. Come inside. Let me look at that wound. He hesitated. You sure? You'll bleed out in my barn otherwise. Rafe followed her in, ducking under the doorway. Tommy ran to him, hugging his father's waist. Rafe placed a rough hand on the boy's head. Told you I'd come back. Lydia fetched a bowl of warm water and tore an old sheet for bandages. When she cleaned the gash on his arm, he flinched but didn't pull away. How'd it happen? She asked. Deputy's bullet, he said quietly. Didn't want to hurt him, just wanted to run. And McCready? You robbed him? Rafe looked up, his eyes steady. No, but I worked for him once. Caught him moving stolen cattle. He figured better to blame me than hang himself. Lydia's breath caught. Her husband, Eli, had worked for McCready, too. Died trying to clear another man's name. Maybe that name was Rafe Callahan. The thought twisted something deep inside her. Rafe noticed her silence. You don't have to believe me. I didn't say I don't, she murmured, binding the bandage tight. Just ain't sure what's true anymore. Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the dry grass. The day felt heavy with things unsaid. When she finished, Rafe flexed his arm, testing it. Thank you, he said simply. Lydia nodded, eyes distant. You'll stay till you can ride again. After that, we'll see what the truth brings. He looked toward the door, then back at her. That might be trouble for you. She met his gaze without flinching. I've had trouble before. The fire crackled between them, warm against the chill air. Tommy sat close to his father, drawing in the ashes with a stick, while Lydia watched them both, two strangers who already felt like something she'd lost long ago. Outside, the mist burned away, leaving the land bare and waiting. Days passed with the quiet rhythm of work and watchfulness. Lydia rose before dawn, milking the cow and tending the small patch of garden behind the cabin. Rafe stayed out of sight, helping only when the deputy's horse tracks faded from the road. Tommy followed him everywhere, asking about horses, rope tricks, and what it felt like to sleep under the stars. Rafe never said much. His words came slowly, like a man who'd learned silence was safer than speech. One morning, Lydia found him fixing the barn roof. He balanced on the beam, sleeves rolled up, hammer steady despite his healing arm. She stood below, shielding her eyes from the sun. You don't have to do that, she called. Rafe looked down. A man's got to pay his keep somehow. Lydia smiled faintly. Most just chop wood. I'm better at roofs, he said. Wood, I can't trust it not to splinter. The way he said it made her chest tighten. He worked hard and asked for nothing, just water, a meal, and space to breathe. But she could see the weight behind his eyes. That evening, they sat outside as the sky burned orange over the ridge. Tommy fell asleep against his father's knee, a half-carved wooden horse still in his small hand. Rafe set the knife aside. Was he your only one? Lydia asked quietly. Rafe nodded. His ma died in the spring. Fever took her fast. I'm sorry. He looked at her, his voice low. You lost someone too. Lydia didn't answer right away. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the smell of pine and smoke. My husband, Eli, 3 winters ago. What happened? He was trying to help a ranch hand accused of theft. Thought he could talk sense into the sheriff. She paused, staring out at the darkening land. The hand was shot. So was Eli. Deputy called it a stray bullet. Rafe's jaw clenched. McCready's man? She nodded slowly. How'd you know? Because that ranch hand was me. Lydia turned to him, heart pounding. You? He nodded, voice rough. Your husband tried to stop them from taking me. Sheriff said he'd let me go if Eli backed off, but the deputy fired first. Her hands went cold. For a moment the night went silent except for the wind moving through the grass. You're telling me Eli died because of that? She whispered. Rafe's eyes met hers, filled with regret, not fear. If I could trade places, I would. He didn't deserve it. Lydia looked away, blinking fast. I buried him alone. Folks said it was his fault standing with a thief. I ain't asked him to, Rafe said quietly, but I owed him my life. The fire between them cracked, throwing shadows across the porch. Lydia stared into it, her throat tight. The truth hurt, but it also cleared something inside her like rain washing dust from a window. Rafe rose slowly, careful not to wake Tommy. If my being here brings you pain, we'll ride out tonight. Lydia shook her head, voice unsteady. No, you said you were framed. If that's true, running won't prove it. He studied her face. You believe me? I don't know, she admitted. But I know Eli did. They stood there a long moment, two people bound by a death neither caused but both carried. From the road came the faint jingle of spurs, distant but real. Lydia turned her head sharply. Rafe's hand went to his gun. Lawman. Could be, she said, moving fast. Get Tommy inside. Rafe lifted the boy gently and carried him toward the cabin while Lydia blew out the lanterns. The glow vanished, leaving only the pale wash of moonlight over the ridge. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, echoing off the dry earth. Rafe stepped to the window, watching. Just one rider, he whispered. Deputy, Lydia's pulse quickened. He won't quit easily. Rafe looked at her, steady, ready. Then neither will I. The deputy's silhouette appeared at the gate, a black shape against the night. His voice carried through the still air. Mrs. Graves. Got a few more questions about that fella Callahan. Lydia swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the curtain. The past was knocking on her door again, and this time she wasn't sure she could lie it away. The knock came again, harder this time, sharp enough to shake the doorframe. Lydia stood in the dim light of the cabin, her heart beating loud in her ears. Tommy stirred in his sleep, mumbling something soft, and Rafe's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. Stay quiet, Lydia whispered. She crossed the room, lifted the latch, and opened the door just enough to see the deputy's face in the lantern glow. Rain had started again, soft but steady, speckling his coat with silver dots. Evening, Mrs. Graves, he said, voice polite but edged. Sorry to bother you this late. You already did, she answered evenly. What's the trouble now? He smiled, thin, false. We found Callahan's horse about half a mile from here. Means he's close. Thought I'd check if he passed this way. Lydia leaned against the doorframe, keeping her body between the deputy and the warm light inside. I told you before I ain't seen him. Sure you haven't, he said slowly, eyes slipping past her shoulder. Mind if I step in? It's cold out. I do mind, Lydia said. A woman alone has to keep her doors closed. The deputy's smile faded. Strange thing, though. McCready told me your husband used to stand up for men like Callahan. Maybe you're of the same sort. Her chest tightened. My husband stood up for the truth. Not thieves. The deputy tilted his head, studying her. You sure there's nothing here worth my looking at? From the corner of her eye, Lydia saw Rafe's shadow move in the back room. Quiet. Careful. Ready to run if he had to. You think I'd risk my farm for an outlaw? She asked, forcing a small laugh. I got enough trouble patching fences. The deputy took a slow step closer. Trouble's exactly what he brings. That man's dangerous, Mrs. Graves. You'd do better handing him over than having him found here. Lydia met his gaze squarely. If I see him, you'll be the first to know. The deputy's jaw worked like he was chewing on a thought. Then he tipped his hat. You've got a strong will, ma'am. Reckon that's what keeps you alive out here. He turned, boots crunching on the wet dirt, and climbed back on his horse. But before he rode off, he called over his shoulder. Word of advice, sometimes the law doesn't wait for proof. The sound of hooves faded into the distance. Only when it was gone did Lydia let out the breath she'd been holding. Rafe stepped out of the shadows, his face tight.
"He knows. Maybe," she said.
"But he ain't sure yet. That won't last," Rafe muttered. "He'll be back." Lydia crossed her arms. "Then we best be ready." Rafe looked at her, puzzled. "You mean to help me? After what you learned?" She hesitated, then nodded. "My husband died helping a man the law called guilty. If I turn my back on the next one, what was his death worth?" Rafe's eyes softened. "You're risking more than you know." "I know exactly," she said. "You'll stay till that arm heals properly. Then we'll find proof." "Proof?" She nodded toward the locket Tommy had left on the table. "You said you were framed. There's a name engraved inside that locket. Maybe it leads somewhere." Rafe opened the locket, holding it close to the firelight. The initials were small but clear. J.M. McCready's foreman, he said slowly. "Jonas Miller. He's the one who handled the money that night." Lydia's eyes narrowed.
"He still works for McCready?"
"Far as I know," Rafe said. "And if he's still in town, he's sitting on the truth that could clear my name." Lydia straightened. "Then we'll bring it to light." He looked at her in disbelief. "You'd stand with me? Against McCready and the law?" Her voice was steady. "I already buried one good man for the truth. I won't bury another for a lie." Rafe held her gaze, silent for a long moment. Then he gave a small nod. "All right. But if this goes wrong, if they come for you, then I'll face it," she said, her tone like iron. The fire crackled between them, lighting their faces with a soft orange glow. Tommy stirred again, curling closer to the warmth. Outside, lightning flickered far over the plains, lighting the deputies' tracks in the mud. They led back toward McCready's ranch, toward the man who'd built his empire on lies. Tomorrow those lies would be tested, and Lydia Graves would stand in their way. Morning came pale and windless. The prairie looked washed clean from the night's rain, every blade of grass tipped with silver. Lydia watched the horizon from her porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Behind her, Rafe saddled his horse quietly, checking the straps and cinch. "You're sure you want to do this?" she asked. He nodded once. "If Jonas Miller's still working for McCready, he'll talk." "One way or another," Lydia frowned. "And if the deputy's there?" Rafe met her eyes. "Then I'll keep to the shadows. I won't drag you into it," she crossed her arms. "You already have." He gave a small smile. "Worn, tired, but real. Then I'll make it worth the trouble." Inside, Tommy was still sleeping, one arm flung across the blanket. Lydia brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "He'll be scared when he wakes." "I'll be back before sundown," Rafe promised. "You got my word." She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. "All right. But if the deputy rides this way again, I'll stall him as long as I can." Rafe adjusted his hat. "You're braver than most men I've known. And you're not half as bad as the stories say," she replied, voice soft. He gave her one last look before riding off across the open land, dust curling up behind his horse. Lydia stood watching until he disappeared into the shimmer of heat on the horizon. Hours passed slowly. She worked the fields, fed the hens, tried to keep her mind on small things, but her eyes kept drifting to the road. By afternoon, Tommy woke and ran to her. "Where's Pa?" "He's gone to make things right," she said. "He'll be back. Promise?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Promise." At the McCready ranch, the air was thick with the smell of horses and sweat. Rafe tied his mare behind a line of wagons and moved through the shadows near the corral. Men were working, loading hay, mending fences, but none looked up. Through the open door of the barn, he saw Jonas Miller. The man's hair was grayer now, his frame heavier, but his eyes were still sharp and mean. Rafe stepped inside. "Been a while, Jonas." Jonas spun, hand going to his belt, but froze when he recognized the voice. Rafe Callahan. You've got guts coming here. I've got reasons, Jonas smirked. You ought to thank me. I gave you a reputation. Whole territory knows your name now. Rafe's face stayed calm. You framed me for a robbery I never committed. McCready's orders, Jonas said, shrugging. He wanted someone to take the fall. You were handy. Rafe's hand tightened into a fist. You'll tell that to the deputy yourself, Jonas laughed. Deputy's on McCready's payroll. You think he'll listen? He'll hang before your boots hit the ground. Rafe stepped closer. I've got something you don't, truth. And a woman willing to stand for it. Jonas's smirk faltered for a second. That widow out at Dusty Ridge? McCready told me to keep an eye on her. Said she's too nosy for her own good. Rafe's blood ran cold. You leave her be. Jonas reached for the pistol on the workbench. Can't promise that. Rafe moved fast. The gun fired, the bullet grazing his shoulder. He grabbed Jonas's arm, twisting it until the pistol fell. They crashed against the stall wall, hay flying. Talk, Rafe growled. Tell me what McCready did. Jonas struggled, red-faced. He took the payroll money himself. Said he'd use it to buy silence. The deputy helped cover it. Rafe hit him once, enough to make the man drop to his knees. That's all I needed. But before he could move, the barn door flew open. Deputy Hank stood there, gun drawn. Well, the deputy said. Look what wandered in. Rafe froze, eyes darting for cover. Jonas, still on the ground, started to laugh through his split lip. Guess I won't be hanging alone, he spat. The deputy aimed at Rafe. Drop it, Callahan. You're done. Rafe raised his hand slowly, jaw tight. You're protecting a thief, Hanks. The deputy grinned. McCready pays better than the law ever did. Then you're both lower than dust, Rafe said quietly. The deputy's finger tightened on the trigger. Then came the sound of hooves outside. Fast. Hard. Coming closer. Through the open door, Lydia appeared riding her husband's old horse. Her eyes were fierce, her voice steady. Drop the gun, deputy, she called, rifle aimed straight at his chest. For a moment, no one breathed. Then everything broke loose. The deputy's eyes flicked toward Lydia, his finger still tight on the trigger. Put that rifle down, Mrs. Graves, he said, trying to sound calm. You don't know what you're walking into. I know enough, Lydia said. Her voice didn't shake. I know you're protecting a man who killed my husband and framed another. Hanks's smirk faltered. You don't want to do this. The law's the law. The law buried my husband, she snapped. You're just wearing its badge. Rafe stood perfectly still, watching the space between the two guns. He could see her hands trembling, just barely, but her aim stayed true. Jonas Miller groaned on the ground beside him, clutching his bruised face. You all right? Lydia asked without looking away from the deputy. I'll live, Rafe said softly. The deputy laughed, dry and mean. You think you're gonna ride out of here? You'll both hang for this. Lydia took one step closer. Not if the truth comes out first. Rafe moved slightly, enough to edge between her and Jonas. He confessed, Hanks. Said McCready took the payroll money. You helped cover it. Lies, the deputy spat. Jonas tried to stand, spitting blood. He ain't lying. McCready gave us both a cut. Shut your mouth. The deputy barked, turning his gun on Jonas. That was his mistake. Rafe lunged, grabbing Hank's wrist. The gun fired, the shot cracking through the barn. Lydia's rifle went off almost at the same time, splintering the beam beside the deputy's head. Hanks twisted, elbowing Rafe hard, but Rafe held on, forcing the gun aside until it fell into the straw. The two men crashed against the wall, fists swinging, boots scraping over the dirt floor. Lydia dropped her rifle and ran forward, grabbing Tommy's locket from around her neck, the one she'd kept safe when Rafe left. She shoved it toward Jonas. If you want to live, tell the truth. Say who it belongs to. Jonas gasped for air. It was McCready's mark.
He used it to sign the payroll papers.
Rafe hit the deputy once more, sending him sprawling into the feed bin. Hanks tried to rise, but Lydia had already picked up his gun. She pointed it straight at his chest. End of the line, she said. Rafe's breath came heavy, blood running down his arm. You should have stayed home, he said to Lydia, his voice rough. She shook her head. You'd be dead if I did. Sirens weren't a thing out here, only the sound of riders. And they were coming fast again, more of Macready's men. Dust rose on the horizon, a cloud of brown and fear. Jonas groaned. He sent the rest. Said to clean up what's left. Rafe looked toward the open door. Then we can't stay. He took the deputy's belt, tying his hands behind his back. You'll answer to the circuit judge come spring, he told him. Hank sneered. If you make it that far. Lydia handed Rafe the locket. It's proof now. Take it. Rafe shoved it into his pocket, grabbed his hat, and looked to her. Get on your horse. We ride for the canyon. It's narrow. They'll have to come single file. Jonas staggered to his feet. You can't outrun Macready. Watch me, Rafe said. He and Lydia burst out into the open sunlight, mounting fast. The prairie spread wide before them, golden and windswept. Behind, the pounding of hooves grew louder. 6, maybe 7 riders closing in. Rafe leaned close to her. Stay left when we reach the ridge. There's a cut in the rocks, you'll see it. They rode hard. Wind tore at Lydia's hair. Her heart pounded with each gallop. She hadn't ridden this fast since Eli was alive. Bullets whined past them, one striking the ground near her boot. She didn't look back. Rafe fired once over his shoulder, forcing the riders to spread. Dust blinded the air. Almost there, he shouted. They reached the edge of the canyon, a steep, narrow drop twisting between cliffs. The horses plunged down the path, stones tumbling beneath their hooves. When they reached the bottom, Rafe turned and fired again, his shots echoing off the walls. One rider fell. The rest pulled back, waiting for orders. Lydia caught her breath, gripping the reins tight. We can't keep running forever. Rafe reloaded, eyes still on the rim. We don't have to. Once we get that locket to the marshal in Red Bluff, Macready's finished. And if he reaches us first? Rafe gave a tired grin. Then I guess he'll wish he hadn't. They rode deeper into the canyon, the sound of pursuit fading behind them. The sun dipped low, painting the rocks blood red. Between them, something had changed. No more fear, no more doubt. Just 2 souls bound by the same fight, heading toward whatever truth waited ahead. By the time night fell, the canyon had turned cold and blue. Shadows stretched long over the rocks, and every sound, the echo of hooves, the rustle of wind, felt louder than it should. Lydia's hands were numb on the reins. Tommy leaned against her, half asleep, bundled in her shawl. Rafe rode a few yards ahead, his shoulders stiff, eyes scanning the ridge. He hadn't spoken much since they left the ranch. Every so often he'd stop and listen, watching the sky for smoke or dust. There was none. Finally he slowed his horse and nodded toward a low cave set into the canyon wall. We'll stop here till dawn, he said quietly. Lydia followed him inside. The air smelled of earth and old rain. Rafe gathered some brush and struck a match, coaxing a small flame to life. The light flickered across his face, showing the cut on his cheek and the tiredness in his eyes. Tommy needs rest, Lydia said softly. He's been through too much. Rafe nodded. So have you. She laid the boy down near the fire, tucking her shawl around him. For a moment she just watched the flames dance over his small hands. Then she turned toward Rafe. You could have run when the deputy showed up, she said. But you stayed. He poked at the fire with a stick, the sparks leaping up. I ain't running from the truth anymore. Lydia sat across from him, pulling her knees close. You still think the marshal in Red Bluff will believe you? If we get there before Macready finds us, Rafe said. That locket proves the payroll papers were forged. It's his handwriting, not mine. And you think that'll be enough? Rafe looked up. The firelight caught the edge of his jaw. It has to be. I'm tired of fighting shadows. A long silence stretched between them. The fire crackled, the wind sighed through the cave mouth, and somewhere outside a coyote called. Lydia's eyes softened as she looked at him. When I first saw you riding up that morning, she said, I thought you were trouble. I was, Rafe said, a faint smile on his lips. Still might be. But you saved us. You didn't have to. He shrugged. You took my boy in when no one else would. That makes us even." She shook her head. "That's not how kindness works." Rafe leaned back against the stone wall. "You ever think maybe this was supposed to happen? You finding Tommy, me showing up at your door?" Lydia's eyes glimmered in the firelight. "I used to think God quit listening after Eli died. Maybe I was wrong." For a while neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't empty. It was peaceful, like the land had gone quiet to listen. Then Rafe shifted, wincing as he moved his arm. The bandage Lydia had tied earlier was soaked through. "You're bleeding again," she said, getting up quickly. She tore a strip from her petticoat and knelt beside him. "Hold still." Rafe gave a half smile. "You bossing me around now?" "Someone has to," she murmured. Her hands worked gently, pressing the cloth against his skin. He flinched but didn't pull away. When she finished, she looked up, and their faces were closer than either meant for them to be. The firelight flickered between them, and for a heartbeat the world outside disappeared. "You should rest," she said finally, breaking the spell. Rafe nodded slowly. "You too." They lay down on opposite sides of the fire. Tommy stirred once, mumbling in his sleep, and Lydia brushed a hand over his hair. Rafe watched her from the shadows. There was strength in her face even when she was worn thin. She wasn't just kind, she was brave. The kind of bravery he'd only seen once before in a man who died to save him. The wind picked up outside, whistling through the canyon like a lonely song. Lydia's eyes drifted shut. Rafe stayed awake, keeping watch until the fire burned low. When the first pale light touched the cave walls, he rose quietly. He went outside and looked toward the east. The sun was still hidden behind the ridge, but the sky was turning gold. For the first time in years, Rafe felt something like hope. Then, faint but clear, he heard the sound he dreaded. Hooves. Many of them. He turned back to the cave. "Lydia," he said, his voice steady. "Wake the boy." "They found us." She was on her feet in an instant, eyes wide. "How far?" "Too close," he said, loading his gun. "We'll have to ride hard. If we can make the bluff by midday, we might reach the marshal's camp before they do." Lydia grabbed her bag and threw on her shawl. "Then we'd better move fast." They led the horses from the cave, the morning wind sharp and cold. The canyon stretched out before them like a promise and a warning, both. And as they rode into the sunrise, Lydia thought, whatever happened next, she'd already made her choice. The morning light spilled across the canyon, painting the rocks gold and red. Dust rose under the horses' hooves as Lydia, Rafe, and Tommy rode hard toward the open plains. The air was thin and sharp, every breath burning their lungs. Behind them, the echo of pursuit grew louder. Shouts, the pounding of hooves, the whistle of bullets. McCready's men were closing in. "Keep low," Rafe shouted. "Stay behind me." Lydia gripped the reins tight, her heart slamming against her ribs. Tommy clung to her waist, his small fingers clutching her dress. She could feel his trembling, his fear. A bullet hissed past her ear, striking a rock ahead. The sound split the air. Rafe turned in the saddle and fired back twice, hitting one of the riders. The man tumbled from his horse, but the others didn't slow down. "They're not stopping," Lydia cried. "They won't," Rafe said. "Not till McCready gets what he wants. And what's that?" He looked at her. Silence. They reached a dry riverbed that wound north toward the bluffs. The path was narrow and rough, filled with stones and twisted brush. Rafe rode into it first, his horse stumbling but keeping pace. "Stay close," he called. They followed the bends of the old river, the canyon walls rising high on both sides. The air was cooler here, heavy with the smell of dust and sage. Every sound echoed. Lydia's horse stumbled on a rock, nearly throwing her, but she caught the reins and steadied it. Rafe turned back, eyes wide. "You all right?" She nodded breathlessly. "Go." He nodded once and spurred his horse forward again. After what felt like hours, but was likely minutes, they reached a fork in the canyon. One path led upward toward the ridge, the other deeper into the rocks. Rafe hesitated. The hoofbeats were still behind them, closer now. "This way," he said, choosing the ridge. "We can see the plains from the top. If the marshal's scouts are near, they'll spot us." They climbed the narrow path, rocks crumbling under the horses' hooves. The sun beat down from above and sweat stung Lydia's eyes. Her arms ached, but she didn't dare stop. Halfway up, a gunshot cracked through the air. Rafe's hat flew from his head. Another shot hit the rock beside Lydia's boot, sending shards flying. "They've got rifles," Rafe yelled. "Keep moving." Tommy whimpered and Lydia bent low over him. "Hold on, sweetheart. We're almost there." When they finally reached the ridge, they burst into open air. Below, the land spread wide and endless, rolling fields, a glimmer of distant smoke from a campfire. Rafe pointed. "That's them. The marshal's men." But before relief could set in, a voice shouted from behind, "Drop the gun, Callahan." McCready rode up from the canyon, flanked by two men with rifles. His gray beard caught the sunlight and his smile was cold as stone. "You led me on quite a chase," he said. "But it ends here." Rafe turned slowly, keeping himself between McCready and Lydia. "You still got the nerve to wear that star on your vest?" he said, his tone low. McCready's grin widened. "You think anyone will believe your story? You're an outlaw." "Always were," Lydia spoke up, her voice steady. "We have proof. Your mark's on the payroll papers, on that locket too." McCready's smile faltered. "You don't know what you're talking about, woman." "I know enough," she said. "The marshal will too." McCready raised his gun. "You ain't reaching that marshal." Rafe's jaw tightened. "Maybe not, but you won't hurt her." In one motion, Rafe fired first. The shot hit McCready's shoulder, spinning him back. His men raised their rifles, returning fire. Rafe dove for cover, pulling Lydia down with him. "Stay low," he shouted. The air was filled with dust and gunfire. Bullets struck the rocks, sparks flying. Tommy cried out, clinging to Lydia. Rafe reloaded, teeth clenched, and shot again. One rider fell, the other turned his horse and fled. McCready groaned, clutching his arm, crawling toward his gun. Lydia grabbed her rifle. Her hand shook, but her aim held true. "Don't," she warned. McCready froze, breathing hard. His eyes burned with hate. "You think you're better than me? You'll hang with him, woman. Ain't no lawman gonna save." Hoofbeats thundered from the east. A voice rang out, "Drop your weapon, by order of the U.S. Marshal." 5 riders crested the ridge, rifles drawn, badges glinting in the sun. McCready's eyes went wide. He looked at Rafe, then at Lydia, and slumped, his strength gone. The lead marshal dismounted, his coat whipping in the wind. "We've been tracking you for 3 days," he said to McCready. "You're finished." Rafe lowered his gun slowly, his chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Lydia reached for Tommy, pulling him close. The marshal turned to her. "You Mrs. Graves?" She nodded weakly. He looked at Rafe. "Callahan here says you've got something that proves his story." Lydia handed him the locket. "It's all there. McCready's mark." The marshal studied it, then looked at McCready. "She's right." The outlaw sagged, eyes full of fury. "You'll regret this, woman." Lydia's voice didn't waver. "No, I won't." The marshals bound McCready's hands and led him toward their horses. The air went still again, broken only by the sound of the wind and the creak of leather saddles. Rafe watched them go, his expression unreadable. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't running anymore. Lydia turned to him. "It's over." He looked at her, tired but smiling faintly. "Not yet, but almost," she nodded, her eyes soft. "Let's go home." The sun was sinking low when they rode back toward Dusty Ridge. The sky glowed copper and rose, the kind of light that made everything look softer, like the land itself was breathing easier. Lydia rode beside Rafe, Tommy asleep against her back, his small head resting on her shoulder. The marshals had taken McCready and his men east to face trial. Rafe had been cleared on the spot, his name finally clean. Yet the silence between him and Lydia wasn't empty. It was heavy, full of everything they'd been through and everything they hadn't said yet. They passed the edge of the burned barn, what was left of it standing like black ribs against the light. Lydia slowed her horse, her throat tightening. "All that work, gone," she murmured. Rafe looked at the ruins. "A barn can be built again." Lydia gave a small smile. You say that like you've built one before. He chuckled quietly. Ain't much, I haven't tried once. They dismounted and walked the rest of the way toward the cabin. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush. The house still stood, weathered but waiting. Lydia pushed open the door and the hinges creaked like an old song. Inside, everything was as she left it. The Bible on the table, the cold ashes in the hearth, the rocking chair that never stopped when the wind blew through. She set Tommy down on the bed, covering him with a quilt. The boy barely stirred, worn out from the long ride. Rafe stood near the door, hat in hand. You got a good place here, he said softly. It was Eli's dream, Lydia replied, brushing dust off the mantel. I tried to keep it alive. He looked at her for a long moment. Seems to me you did more than that. You made it a home. Lydia turned toward him. And you? What'll you do now? Rafe glanced outside toward the fading light. Thought I'd ride west. Maybe find work where a man's name doesn't carry shadows. She nodded slowly, though her heart twisted. You could, but... He asked. She hesitated. Tommy needs his father, and I could use another set of hands around here. Rafe smiled faintly. That an offer? She looked down at her hands. It's something like it. He took a slow step closer. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. Lydia, when I first came here, I figured you'd turn me in. I didn't expect kindness. Or faith. She met his eyes. I didn't have much left of either. But somehow you brought both back. For a moment neither spoke. The only sound was the wind against the walls, soft and steady. Rafe set his hat down and reached for her hand. His fingers were rough, warm, real. You saved me, he said simply. You and that boy both. Tears shimmered in her eyes, though she tried to hide them with a small laugh. Seems we're even now, he shook his head. No, not yet. The last light of the sun spilled through the doorway, washing over them in gold. Tommy stirred, sitting up on the bed, rubbing his eyes. Ma'am, he said sleepily. Is Pa staying? Lydia looked at Rafe, then back at the boy. Her voice softened. If he wants to. Rafe's chest tightened. He looked at her, the woman who had risked everything for him, and then at the child who had been his reason to keep fighting. He stepped closer, his voice low and certain. I've been riding a long time, son. Never found a place that felt like home. Not till now. Tommy smiled, his eyes half closed again. Then you're home. Rafe's throat tightened. He turned to Lydia, his eyes glinting in the firelight. You're the home I've been searching for. Lydia's breath caught. She smiled through her tears, whispering, and you finally found it. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and new grass. The fire crackled softly as night fell over Dusty Ridge. Rafe placed another log on the flames, then sat beside Lydia. The two of them watched the fire together, quiet, steady, alive. In that small cabin, in a land that had taken so much, something new had begun. The storm had passed. The prairie stretched wide and endless before them, and for the first time in years, it felt like tomorrow might be kind. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video. It helps more folks find it. Subscribe for more Wild West tales of love, loss, and redemption. And tell us in the comments, what part of Lydia and Rafe's story stayed with you the most? Till next time, ride safe and keep your heart brave.